Today we are going to be learning about a tool called Web Intelligence. Web Intelligence is a tool that we briefly talked about when we were talking about business objects and all of the tools that come with business objects. It is a tool used by end users for reporting or querying and analysis, whatever you want to call it. Typically, it's not a tool that is used by developers, but as a developer, you must know how to use Web Intelligence because the end users are always going to have questions about how do I do this or how do I do that. So unless you master the tool, you are not going to be able to answer those questions. And from time to time, you are going to be building stuff using Web Intelligence if you have a job in business objects as well. So for all of the learning in Web Intelligence, I am going to be using the rich client version of this tool. So Web Intelligence Rich Client, and I'm using the standalone. So I can show you how exactly to launch it. You basically can go to the start and type Web Intelligence, and then it will come up. I'm actually remoting into a server, so probably you're not going to be able to see that. But so launching it is pretty straightforward. This tool comes in two flavors. One is called Rich Client, which is part of the Business Objects Client tool install that you are provided with. The other one is called Thin Client or simply Web Intelligence. The Thin Client version is launched from the server. Since we haven't connected to the server throughout this course, we have used Universe Designer in standalone mode as well. We are going to just use Web Intelligence in the standalone mode as well. So just a quick thing about Thin Client versus Rich Client. Now, when you open Web Intelligence, typically this window comes up. This is where you will see any of the documents that you have created. In your case, this should be blank. This is where it shows all of the universes that are available to you for use. Make sure if a universe is not showing up here, make sure the universe is stored in the universes folder. If you remember, by default, any universe you create gets stored in the universes folder. There is a kind of a hierarchy, if you will, of that folder structure where you save the universe. So if something is not showing up, make sure it is saved in the universes folder for it to show up here. So once a universe is saved there in the universes folder, you can see it in Web Intelligence, and you can simply click on that universe to open up that universe. In addition, you can create Web Intelligence documents using Excel as a source. You can use BEX queries as a source. You can use an analysis view as a source or a text file as a source. For the most part, I'm going to be focusing on building Web Intelligence reports using universes, and I'm going to be mostly using eFashion. So once you click on the universe, it opens up this window, which is called the query panel. Okay. In the query panel, you have a universe which is shown here. So this is the name of the universe. This is a sign of the universe. And these are all of the folders and objects that come from the universe. Right? So these are the objects that were created when the universe was created. So if you actually open up the universe, and then you open up, let's say, the eFashion universe, you can see that these objects and classes are there in the universe. But the universe is put together by the developer. That's why the universe, when you open the universe, you see all of these things. You see the tables, you see the joins, and you see the objects as well. The universe is used by end users to build reports with. So, do the end users care about what tables and what joins and everything on the site? They don't. So, hence, when you open up a universe in web intelligence, you only see the objects. You do not see anything about the tables these objects come from, what SQL runs behind the scene, how they are joined, whether it's inner join, outer join, how many loops there were, how many traps there were. Those are all things that a universe designer takes care of when the universe is built. And when the universe is exported or made available to the users, they use web intelligence to just run reports with it. Okay, so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that it's the same universe that we are talking about, the same universe that we built using the universe design tool or the information design tool. When you are building the universe, you are doing what a business objects developer does, which means you're building the universe, and then you make the universe available to the users. And when you are learning about web intelligence, you don't see all of the additional things that are there in the universe because those are not needed for the users to know. Okay. The other thing that I'll show you was the folder that I was talking about. So if you click on in the universe designer, if you click on this open thing, you see this universes folder. So this is the path to this universe folder. So any universes in the universes folder are going to be available to Webby. So just in case you created a universe, you saved it on the desktop of your computer, that's not showing up in Webby, you just have to make sure you move that universe to this folder for it to show up in Webby. Okay. All right, so I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to minimize the universe designer. Maybe in future I'll need it, so I can go back to it. All right, back to web intelligence. So how did we get here? We got here by, we were actually right here. When we launch Webby, we selected a universe, and when we select a universe, it opens up the query panel. Okay, so in the query panel, I told you that this is the name of the universe. These are all of the objects that come from the universe. So if I want to search for an object, let's say there are 50 of these folders, and I don't know which folder or subfolder an object is in, and I have some idea about the name of the object. So I know that the object is called something like year. So when I type a partial name, it will give me any object that has that partial name in it. Okay, so I can search for objects if I want to. That makes it a lot easier to find objects when you do not know which class or which folder this object could be in. This is a relatively smaller universe with less number of objects, so it's easier to find things here. But I mean, in real world, there could be classes and subclasses and subclasses, and then it becomes slightly tricky to find an object. That's where the search feature is super helpful. What other things are there in this query panel? So on the left hand side, you have the universe and all of the objects that come from the universe. Then on the right hand side here, you have this portion which is called results object panel, and this is where you bring something in this panel to have those objects or have those columns available in your report. So it's pretty straightforward to bring something. Either I can double click and it shows up here, or I drag and drop. So double click or drag and drop will get the objects here. Any object in the result object panel are the objects that are going to show up in your web intelligence report. And then you have a panel called query filter panel. This is where you build your conditions, build your filters. Now remember, there are some filters automatically available to you here, right? You see the filter sign? Where are these filters coming from? These filters are coming from the universe. So do you see the filters here? No, you don't. But if you click on this toggle button, it will show you all of the filters that are built in the universe. Do you remember the last lecture about building restrictions? We learned about different kinds of restrictions that you build, and then you also learned about a predefined filter which can be applied as a mandatory filter or as an optional filter. So this is an optional filter that is built in the universe, which basically will give you this result. Okay, so back to web intelligence. So these filters are there in the universe. So unlike an object, when you double click on an object, it shows up in the result object panel. If you double click on a filter, it shows up in the query filter panel, or you can drag and drop to the query filter panel, right? How do you remove something from any of the panels? You can drag it off, or you can click on it and hit the delete button, which is right here, right here, right here. So if I want to get rid of, let's say, the city object, I can click on this and then I can click on this X to remove it, or I can drag it back to the left hand side. Okay, so anyway, so I think everybody's clear about result object panel. Everybody's clear about the query filter panel. One last thing is, what if I want to build a condition? A condition is not defined in the universe, and I want to build a condition. So you can, let's say the condition that I want to build is about the category. So I can grab an object and drop it here. And then when I drop an object here, it automatically gives me three things. So the object on which you're building the condition, what operator are you going to use? So these are a list of operators, equal to, in list, not in list. And then you can type in a value here, or you can say, well, I want a value from the list, and then it shows you all of the different values that are available in this object. Where is this list of values coming from? Of course, it's coming from the universe, but do you remember where this list of values was in the universe? So I'm going to go back to the universe to show it to you. So list of values, I'm using the category object. Double click on the object. This is the definition of the object. You go to the properties tab. There was a associate a list of value. Okay, so a list of value is nothing but a distinct list of all of the values or all of the column values in this object. By default, every object has a list of value, and then it just assigns a name of the list of value as well. Okay, so that's how the list of value is showing up. A list of value is nothing but a distinct query. Every time you just hit this refresh button, your business object server sends a distinct query to the database. So it's saying select distinct category from whatever table, right? So that's what it's doing. So I can basically say something, or I can pick something, and then I can build a condition. Right now, I'm not worried about building the condition. I'm just going to build a query without a condition. So I just wanted to show it to you. We will progress step by step in web intelligence. So the first query that I'm building is pretty straightforward, 3 objects, no conditions. And this panel is where you can preview data. Basically, if I hit refresh, then I can get some data in there. You don't necessarily have to use this. You can always run the query and get it as well. I believe this kind of gets a top 20, top 50 kind of records from the database. Anyways, next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to run this report or run this query that I'm building. Now, if I want to see the SQL behind this, how would I see it? There is this little guy up here which is called view script. So when you click on this, it shows you the SQL that is going to run on the database. Now, again, keep in mind, who wrote the SQL? Did you write the SQL? we did not write the SQL, right? So where is the SQL coming from? So the SQL again is generated by the universe. So this object, if you remember, in the universe, when you double click, this is the select of the object. This object has this select, and then the other objects have their own select, right? So when you put these things here, behind the scene, the universe generates a SQL. Okay, and since I have a measure here, that's why I have a group by. Again, this is not a database management or database foundation class. That's why I'm not going to get into the SQL portion. I assume those who have taken that class, they already know how to write SQL. So the SQL is generated by the BI tool. All I'm doing is I'm running the query. So when I hit run query, what happens? The business objects tool uses the SQL, sends it to the database using the connection that we have defined. The SQL is executed on the database, and then the results are sent back to the business objects client. In case if you're running it through the server, then the results are sent back to the server. So now we are still in Webby, but you notice that the look and feel has changed, right? The look and feel is not the same. I don't see a list of objects here, or even when I see a list of objects, I only see these 3 objects on the side. I don't see all of the objects, and I see something called report 1, and I see the results. And then there are a lot of options up here. There are options to insert tables, insert charts, do data analysis, do formatting, and all of that, right? So definitely now we are not in the edit query panel. This is called the edit report panel. Once you run the query, you are done with the query, you are in the report. So, and by default, when you run a query, it displays the information in the form of a table. So that's what it's doing. Now, why do I only have 3 objects here? Because I only selected 3 objects in my query. So when I run the query in the report, I'm only going to have what I selected. Okay, so I hope it all makes sense. Now, the first thing first, how do I move things around? I can move the table anywhere. When you bring the mouse over to the edge of the table, notice it changes, and then you can click and grab it and then basically move it around. You can similarly delete it as well. If you select it and then hit delete, you can delete it. You can, if you bring the mouse over to the edge of the columns, you can basically resize the columns. So we'll worry about the formatting part later on, but right now this is the information that you are looking at. How do I go back to the query and add something else to the query? So if anytime if you want to go back to the query and add anything else, up here in the tabs, there's a data access tab. Go to the data access tab and then say edit. So now we are back to the query. I can add anything else that I want to. So let's say I'm going to add category to the query. Now, anytime you add something to the query, what's going to happen to the query? The query is going to change, right? And the results that you have in the report did not have data about this. So what do you have to do? You would have to rerun the query to get the results. So I would have to rerun to get the results. So now look at the objects here. I have that extra object here, which wasn't there in my report, right? However, that extra object doesn't show up in the table. So why is that extra object was created but never shown in the table? So think of this scenario. Let's say in your web intelligence document, you have a few tables and a few charts. How would web intelligence know where to put these new objects or these newly added columns? It doesn't know automatically, right? So it basically makes that object available and then lets you do whatever you want to. If you don't want to display it in this table, that's fine. If you want to display it in another table, that's fine, right? So that's something that you would have to do on your own. So grab this. If I want to display it in the table, I haven't dropped it yet. Notice how the background changes. If I drop it here, do you see the blue rectangle? If I drop it here, it's going to override the year object. If I drop it here, it's going to override the state object. If I drop it here, it's going to override the sales revenue object. But if I bring it to the edge, notice how it changes, right? So if I drop it here, it's going to append to the table. So now it is appended to the table. If I want to remove it from the table, I can just grab this, drag it over, and it removes it. There is an undo as well, so I can undo and then bring it back over. So all we have done so far is that we created a very simple web intelligence document. I'm calling it a document and I'm not calling it a report for a purpose, and I'll explain it in a bit. All we have done is we have created a very simple web intelligence document that contains these 3 or 4 columns, and now we are ready to save this. So now when I click on save, by default it saves everything in the user doc folder. You can save it anywhere else as well. I'm going to keep it in the user doc, and I'll call it online class first webby doc, and then notice that the extension is vid, WID. Okay, and you can put a description if you want to. You can put keywords if you want to. There are a few other options, refresh and open and stuff, that we will talk about later. For now, I'm just going to save it. So now I've created my first webby document and saved it. If I close this guy and then come to this recent documents, here is my document, and I can reopen it. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have done. By the way, on e-learning, I will make one document available to you all, a PDF document, which I created when I worked for Cardinal Health. It was created in XI3, which is one version older than the version that we're using, but it was created for end user training. I used to do end user training there. You can follow this step by step. It's a very helpful document. Anything listed here is what I'm going to be covering in the demo that I'm showing you. You can follow it yourself and then do everything in detail. It just gives you a lot more step-by-step details, right? And then it walks you through about with some other things as well. So this is the document that I am referring to, and you can refer to the same document. The only thing is you may find few things different because of course it was created for Cardinal Health on an older version. So this is a reference document for you. All right, so now that I have created a document, a webby document, I'm going to do something more with it. Before I do anything more with it, I want to explain the term document. Anything that you create with web intelligence is called a webby document. Why do we call it a document and not call it a report? Because there are tabs here. Down at the bottom, do you see this tab called report 1? So a webby document can have many different tabs. Just like in Excel, you can have many different tabs. And the tabs here are called reports. So I can basically right click and rename this. I can call it detailed report. And then by default, once you change it, this guy changes as well because it uses a formula which gets the report name. So whatever the name of the report is, that's going to show up here. I can always remove this and type anything else if I want to. I can just remove this guy and say okay, so I can type anything else. It doesn't have to mimic the name of the report. But I can right click here and I can say add report. So that gives me a second tab. In the second tab, I can basically do other things. Like I can go to the report elements tab. I can bring in, create a pie chart, drop it here. I can bring in a measure. I can bring in a dimension, and then I have a pie chart. And again, I'm going to cover these charts and stuff later on. There's a lot of formatting that you can do there. You just right click and then you can say format chart, and gives you a lot of different formatting options. So I'm not spending too much time on formatting at the moment. I'm just showing you a few things here and there. But anyways, the idea is you can have many different tabs in one Webby document. That's why we are going to call it a Webby document, because these tabs are called reports. The other thing is, how, if you remember, how did we get back to the query? We got back to the query by saying data access, edit query. So just like you can have many different tabs, you can have many different queries as well. So one Webby document can have many queries and many tabs, right? So you can basically build a second query and then connect it to an Excel file and bring data from the Excel file, merge the two data sets in the report. You can build a query on maybe a second universe and then get the data in the report and all that. So after creating the first Webby document, one thing that I wanted to get out of the way was the concept of a document. Okay, anything that you create in Webby and you save it as a WID file is called a Webby document. A Webby document can have many tabs, which are called reports, and a Webby document can have many queries. It doesn't necessarily have to have only one query and only one report. The other thing that I want to get out of the way before I move on is the concept of something called a data cube. It's also called a microcube, a data cube or a microcube. So I am in the edit query tab. This is where all of the objects that come from the universe are. These are the objects that I selected. Since I have not made any modification, I can simply close it instead of rerunning it. And then when I run it, it gives me only these objects, right? And then in this document, I added a new tab and I inserted this chart, and I basically displayed the information. I just added the sales revenue and the year. Again, there are no captions or anything. Don't worry about it for now. Just try to understand the concept. So when I did this, or when I basically, let's say, remove something from here, or I insert a new report element here, and then populate it with data. So I mean, whenever I'm doing these things, am I rerunning the query? I have not rerun the query. I mean, if every single one of these things that I've done reruns a query, that will generate too much traffic on the database. So by adding a new table, displaying information in the table, by inserting a chart, displaying information in the chart, I have not rerun the query, which means the data is stored somewhere that I'm able to use it, right? So when you first run the query, the data gets stored inside your Webby document, and only those elements and the data for those elements is going to be stored that you have in the query, right? So that's why you only see these 4 objects here. So the data is stored internally in the Webby document in a place which is called a data cube or a microcube. It's not visible to you anywhere, but the data is in this report. And that's why whenever you do something, you add a new table, you add a new chart, you modify the structure of the report, the data is there in the report. You don't have to rerun the query, okay? Every time you rerun the query, the microcube is repopulated. So it's important that you understand the concept that you're not rerunning the query by modifying it, okay? So now that we are done talking about this, let's talk about one other thing that I mentioned when we were creating a universe, and I'll remind you. So this is my universe. when you create a measure function, remember I told you that you can put an aggregate function here in the select, but in the properties tab there's something called projection, right? So there is an aggregation and projection, and if you guys recall, I mentioned that let's wait until we cover web intelligence. That's when I'm going to talk about the difference between aggregation and projection. It's very, very important. I can't tell you how many times I've asked this in an interview and I have not gotten the correct answer. So what is the difference between aggregation and projection? So let me get rid of this table. Let me bring the category object back to this table. Oh, category is there. Let me bring the state object back to the table. So right now, this table represents the data for the year, for the state, and the category. So it represents the sales revenue for the year, state, and category. Notice that every row is unique. So 2004 California 2 pocket shirts is not going to repeat again. So by default, whatever dimensions you pull in, that's kind of the granularity of the data. So for 2004 California 2 pocket shirts, the sales revenue is 50,000, right? If you think in terms of SQL, you are saying select year, state, category, sum of sales revenue from blah, 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 do the join this way, and group by, and in the group by, you're using year, California, and year, state, and category. So since you're using that in the group by, your data is at this granularity, okay? Notice what happens to this number when I start making some changes. So for example, if I remove the category from the picture, what happened to this number? Did this number go up or did it go down? So it was 50,999. Now and these were all of this different categories for California, right? Now when I remove category from the picture, there is only one record for California because now the data is displayed at the year, the state, and year and state level. So now all of those records that were there for the state of California for different categories, they are summed up, right? And now I have one number. Notice what happens if right now I have 2004, California is going to be, and I'm going to swap these columns. So California is there 3 times, one for 2004, one for 5, one for 6, because this database only has these 3 years of data. So what if I remove the year column now? Notice what happens to sales revenue. So the sales revenue now changed again, right? And you only have one record for sales revenue. So why is this happening? Is this happening because of the aggregation? Remember what I said about aggregation. Aggregation kicks in when you send the query to the database. By doing the things that I'm doing right now, am I sending a query to the database? I'm not. I already have this data in my data cube. I'm just playing around with this data. So how come this number keeps changing? This number keeps changing because of projection, which we defined in the universe. Under the properties tab there, we said it's going to be projected using a sum. So every time I remove something from the table, it automatically displays the number or the measure. It displays the measure at the level of the dimension because I have defined that this number or this measure is projected and projected using a sum. So if there were 10 records and I removed a column, and then it actually sums up those 10 lines into one line, and that's what's happening here, right? So this is happening because of projection. So there's a difference between aggregation and projection. Aggregation happens when you summarize the data at a specific level when you run the query. When the query is run and it's sent back to the web intelligence report, then the data in the web intelligence report is at that level. Notice that I have the data at the category, state, and year level. These are objects in my data cube. But it doesn't mean that I only display the data at this level. I can display the data at any other level. And that's only possible if you have projection. If you don't have projection, then it will still keep showing all of the records for California as separate, and I won't be able to sum up at this level. So within the report, when you project that information, when you project that measure at a specific dimension level, that's when projection kicks in. Projection doesn't kick in at the query level. Projection kicks in at the report level, and then aggregation kicks in at the query level. So I hope you are clear about projection and aggregation.